And joining us now, Pat Robertson, the founder and the president of the Christian Coalition, a group that will have a powerful influence, has already had a powerful influence on this convention. Dr. Robertson, let me just ask you the question I've asked Christy Whitman and George Bush. You think Jack Kemp, as your director, Ralph Reed, said, is a terrific pick?
Well, I think what it shows is that Bob Dole is willing to sort of go outside the box and take a bold step, and I think that's what America wants. They want a president who's a bold leader, and he resigned from the Senate, which in itself was a shocker. He could have played it safe, and he didn't, and he did the same thing here. He took somebody whose economic views were considered at odds with his and said, let's bring harmony. So I think it was a very bold, dramatic, and it certainly energized this convention.
Is it going to help?
I think it'll help in the short run, but the long run, it's going to be Dole versus Clinton. Lloyd Bentsen was a fantastic vice presidential pick. I think I could have voted for him for president, but he didn't win because Dukakis was running against Bush. It's a different matter.
I guess one reason I brought this up is I seem to recall that there was a little friction between you and Jack Kemp back in 1988 when both of you were running for president.
There was big-time friction in Michigan. I mean, big time, and the same thing in Iowa. Of course, in every state we ran against, I beat him in every state except New Hampshire. He outspent me 5-1, and then he won by 2,000 votes. In every other state, I was ahead of him dramatically.
But all is forgiven now? You're going to get out a campaign for him?
He and I have been friends since the 70s. Joanne is a marvelous lady. His wife, a wonderful Christian lady. His son, we did a feature on him, Jeff. So, I mean, I think the Kemps are going to be great.
You talk about this being this bold step. All you Republicans talk about how bold this is.
Yeah.
Well, you're almost making Jack Kemp the person, dwarfing the nominee, the presidential nominee himself.
I don't think Bob Dole is going to let it happen, but you've got two extraordinarily dynamic individuals. I don't know what other term to give to them, but there could be some sparks flying.
Where? How?
Well, Jack Kemp is his own man, and he speaks forcefully on what he believes. Bob Dole is his own man, and he speaks forcefully. So who knows whether these views are going to coalesce? We hope they will.
Well, and I think that's a very good point, because there are some things that they really have disagreed on. Is
Yes.
Jack Kemp going to have to come around to Bob Dole's position on, say, immigration, on balancing the budget? Of course, now Senator Dole is saying he's for a big tax cut, affirmative action. How do the twain meet here?
I don't think Kemp is going to give up his deeply held moral points of view, but I mean, let's face it, if he joins a team, he's got to be a player. He's got to do what the coach tells him to. He's a quarterback. The quarterback plays the plays the coach sends him. At least we hope that's the case. But I think he recognizes, and has been pointed out on his program already, he has thought this thing through. He must do what the head of the ticket tells him.
But if he thinks these things, you talk about what a moral man he is, can he then do these things in good conscience?
That's what we'll have to find out in the next 30 to 60 days. And that's why we know we've got a bump now, but what's going to happen later? I mean, these are two very volatile human beings, as you well know. So maybe the American people are looking for some excitement. We might give it to them during the next couple of months.
Well, speaking of team players,
Yes.
Pat Buchanan. Has the time come for Mr. Buchanan to endorse Bob Dole?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, you run in a primary as a Republican, and when you lose in the primary, you endorse the winner. That's the way the game's played.
Well, he hasn't played the game.
Well,
though.
it's time he started playing by the rules.
Has he hurt the party?
Oh, I don't think so yet, but he certainly hurt Bob Dole a great deal around the country. He's built up deep-seated suspicion, and I think it's time that the wounds be healed. That's politics. We get together, as Governor Whitman said, it's a big tent. We say, okay, we don't agree on everything, but we'll go forward together as a united team.
Why has it taken Bob Dole so long to get started? Was it the fact that Steve Forbes entered the race early on and dumped all those negative ads on him? What do you think it was?
I think it's his style in the Senate. This is the way he operated. He would have a deal cut. It would be all set. Then the next morning he'd say, well, let's fix it a little bit. And he'd come back and he'd cut the deal open and he'd play with it a little bit more. Maybe he's a perfectionist. He always wants something a little bit better. But I think we lost about 30 days during the summer of good campaign time, but I believe he'll make it up. Once you put in his hands $55 million ad budget, I think the message will start coming through loud and clear. And he is an outstanding person. I think he's going to make a good candidate.
Let me also ask you about this whole question of abortion. Haley Barbour is now saying that they probably it probably won't be possible to push for the constitutional amendment banning abortion for the practical reason that the votes simply are not there now. What's your response to that?
There's as much chance of a meteorite hitting this broadcast booth as getting a constitutional amendment through the present Congress. The only way we're going to change Roe versus Wade is by 3 new justices of the Supreme Court. That's the only way it's going to happen. So in a sense, this is a statement of deeply held moral principle. The practical effect of it, it might be we stop partial birth abortion, which Clinton vetoed, or we give parental consent or something like that, but that's about as far politically as we can get. But I want the whole thing from a standpoint of morals, but from a standpoint of practical political reality, it's just not going to happen.
So you're willing for the party to kind of back off on that for the time being, just because it's would be wasted effort at this point?
No, they don't back off on it. They keep that principle. They say we're a party for life. We stand for life. I've stood for life ever since 1973. I thought Roe versus Wade was ill-advised, and I still do. I think the slaughter of young children, 34 million, is shocking, and I think it should be stopped. But I also know the political reality that's there, and I'm a realist. But the only way to change this is to change Roe versus Wade, and I think that will be a Supreme Court makeup that'll make it happen.
A lot of moderate Republicans have watched what's been going on here in the last week in the writing of the platform, and they say, you people, you Pat Robertson and your wing of the Republican Party, Christian conservatives have taken over.
Well, you know, we've got a candidate who is an old-line Republican. He was a party chairman. He ran for president, ran for vice president. He's been around, you know, he was served in the Congress with my father. So this is nothing that's taken over. I mean, we have selected a candidate who I supported back in the primary season who is Mr. Republican.
But does the so-called the Christian Coalition, which you head, do you people now have the power and the control here?
I don't think so. I think we're a significant voice in the party. I think that we're growing, and as George Bush said, when we energize, what happens is there's a Republican governor elected, there are 2 senators elected who are Republicans. We supported Kay Bailey Hutchison. She was pro-choice. She's in the Senate. She's a wonderful lady. The same thing with Paul Coverdale in Georgia. We are not some extremist group. All we want to do is to have Christians sit at the table. That's all.
And we'll leave it right there. Right, I wish you the same, that I have Governor Bush and Governor Whitman have a good convention. We hope to see you again down the road.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
We're back now with Pat Choate and former Senator Warren Rudman. Joining us from Virginia Beach, Virginia, Pat Robertson. Mr. Choate, you were Rossborough's running mate last time out. You seem to have some new people coming into your party. Apparently, Donald Trump now says he's going to come into the Reform Party tomorrow. We expect Pat Buchanan to come in. Let me just tell you what Mr. Trump said about Pat Buchanan. He said he's a Hitler lover, an anti-Semite. He doesn't like blacks or gays and would just get the wacko vote. Will you be happy to see him?
Well, I think Donald Trump needs to learn not to delegate his reading and thinking, because Pat Buchanan's never said that or doesn't hold those positions. I do look forward to some debates with Donald Trump.
Do you think Donald Trump is really serious about this?
I don't know. I talked with Roger Stone, and his political consultant, and one can see that he's thinking about it. He's certainly making the moves that would indicate that he would come in. I think it would actually be good for the country if he would do it, because it means the Reform Party would hold a series of debates on issues through the spring of the year 2000, when the other 2 parties will have selected their candidates. And I think those debates and discussion of issues would be electrifying, and I think the public deserves that.
Pat Robertson, you said that you thought that Pat Buchanan might spoil the whole thing for Republicans if he left the Republican Party. You still feel that way?
Well, more or less, Bob, the latest poll, if you believe polls, shows him getting about 9% of the vote, and George Bush still holding 51%, and Al Gore much, much lower, you know, in the high 30s. So the chances are that, as things are right now, but if Pat begins to throw bombs into the middle of the arena, it could stir people up. But I oppose what he's doing. I think it's wrong for somebody to run a couple of times in the primary of his own party, then jump ship just because he can't win. I would urge him to get behind the Republican Party, and if he doesn't like what's being done, see if he can't change it from within.
Warren Rudman, you're a John McCain man, his main man up in New Hampshire. Do you think Pat Buchanan is a factor anymore?
I do not. And as a matter of fact, I think he has greatly forfeited much of what he says he stood for during the last campaign. His book is very offensive, whether he meant it to be so or not. It is very offensive to many people. I don't agree with Trump's comments. He certainly didn't say that he loved Hitler or anything like that, but he certainly, no historian agrees with him that I can find. Number two, I'm sorry to say this on national television, but many people are starting to believe that if he is not an anti-Semite, he certainly is doing a wonderful imitation. Both the Democratic and the Republican Party stand for equality of all people. We have no room in our party, it seems to me, for someone who writes the things that he's written in the last year. That is not just my opinion. That is John McCain's opinion. And he is the one Republican who has stood up and said so. And I'm sorry to see anyone have to leave our party, but there comes a point where enough is enough.
Well, I would say this. Senator McCain obviously had not read the book when he made the comment. He bears false witness when he says that that book dishonors Americans. You have distinguished historians such as Sir John Keegan, Al Eckes, and a series of others take that as a legitimate point of view. And I think what has happened here is a degree of pundit bigotry about Pat Buchanan, where you've had large numbers of people go to print. They cannot find the quotes in Pat Buchanan's book that they want to attack, so they concoct, make up positions, and then attack him on that.
Because, as a matter of fact, he says in the book that in 1940, Hitler posed no threat to the United States. Now, I don't find much of a constituency for that point of view in the country.
Well, there may not be a constituency for that in the country, but you take a look at the country. In 1940, you had 90% of the American people did not want to go to war. And you take a look at historians, and they will tell you flat out, that is a legitimate point of view of history.
So if Hitler hadn't attacked, we should just let it go as it were, because that time he'd rolled over France, Belgium, Holland, Poland, and...
Well, you're making an argument for Franklin Roosevelt's policies, and you're making an argument for the appeasement policies of the time.
Didn't most of the people agree with Franklin Roosevelt?
No, they did not agree with Franklin Roosevelt. They sharply disagreed with Franklin Roosevelt.
They did in time, and because of the good arguments that he put forward.
They did in time, and Adolf Hitler attacked the United States, and of course we had to respond as the Japanese attacked the United States.
Let's get Mr. Robertson in here. Do you think, given Pat Buchanan's book, as controversial as it is, that he is going to take Christian conservatives with him
Gloria,
when he leaves the party?
Absolutely not. I think he's undercut his position. With what Warren Rudman said is absolutely right. He's discredited himself tremendously. You know, in the confines of academia, you can bring forth concepts like this to debate back and forth in an intellectual context, but not in a political campaign. It just doesn't come through right. And I don't think the Christian conservatives are going to go with Pat Buchanan, because the Reform Party, in most of its initiatives, do not agree with the announced aims as far as the social agenda of Pat Buchanan.
You have said that this nomination is George Bush's to lose. Do you wish that George Bush had said something about Pat Buchanan, or said, as Senator McCain did, that it may now be time for him to leave the Republican Party?
I think George Bush is playing it just right. He's playing it to the American people. He's actually running a general election campaign, and there's no sense in stooping to some dog and cat fight with Pat Buchanan. I think he's exactly positioning himself the way the American people like, and all the polls indicate he's doing a superb job.
Well, I would ask Reverend Robertson this: as I take a look at the social agenda of the Christian Coalition and take a look at that at Pat Buchanan, they're similar. Why are you not selecting someone for the Christian Coalitions whose views mirror those of your members?
Well, there's more than that, but Pat, as you know, the Reform Party has been pretty much toward the libertinist point of view, and it does not agree in terms of abortion rights and that sort of thing.
But Pat Buchanan does.
Let's let Senator Rudman get in.
Look, you know, let's all lay it on the table, Pat. I mean, the fact is the Reform Party is a libertarian party. It believes in nothing that Pat Buchanan has preached for the last 4 years. I watch Pat in New Hampshire. He is a social conservative. The only reason you and I both know that he is going after this nomination is the matching $3 million of federal funds. he is being a total hypocrite about seeking that party's nomination. He ought to go to the Constitution Party, which agrees with him, but he won't because they don't have any money.
No,
it's that simple, Pat.
Well, no, let me refer people very quickly. Take a look at Pat Buchanan's website. Take a look at the website of the Reform Party. And what you will find is on trade, fiscal conservative, immigration, political reform. The positions of Pat Buchanan and the Reform Party are the same. True, we have a libertarian view on social issues, but Pat Buchanan's views are very clear and very known, and he's taken those into this election.
But social
it
issues
is a good match here.
But social issues have been the foundation of Pat Buchanan's campaigns.
Well, and he still has those social issues. Those are his
Pat
positions.
Robertson is trying to say
well,
something.
as I want to say that his appeal to the Christian conservatives, the Christian coalition, has been the social message, and it looks to them that he's forsaking that to go, as was very aptly said by Warren Rudman, he wants it, I believe it's 13.5 million he's trying to get.
Let's clear it up right now. He is not forsaking that. He has the message that your coalition has stood for. Your coalition should be supporting him.
Let's talk about one person whose name we have not mentioned who has been important to the Reform Party in the past, and that is, of course, Ross Perot. He's been silent. We haven't heard from him. The word is, Mr. Choate, that he is quietly endorsing Pat Buchanan's candidacy without coming out there for him. You talk to Mr. Perot regularly. You were his running mate. Where is he?
He is staying very neutral in this race. He is not saying it so that there's no misimpression that he is supporting one side or one candidate. It is true neutrality in this.
Could you see him supporting Donald Trump, for example?
We would let him answer that, but he is staying neutral.
Well, then there's another question, which is, will he do to Pat Buchanan what he did to Dick Lamb, the former governor of Colorado, which is get in at the last minute and decide that he's got to rescue the party and run? Let me ask you that, and let's ask...
He didn't do anything to Dick Lamb. First of all...
but he did run.
He did run.
Could he get in again?
Ross Perot did not want to run in 1996. He went to the Federal Election Commission and asked that the $29 million that was eligible to him be available to the party. The Federal Election Commission said the only way the money could come is if Ross Perot ran. And he ran, and it was a fair and straight election.
Could he get in again?
He could, always could. I would be surprised.
Yeah, Gloria, if we have time, you've discussed whether Buchanan will hurt the party, whether Buchanan, whether Bush or McCain or whomever wins our nomination. I think you have to look at the Electoral College. My view is that he won't. If it was a pure vote situation where he could take 8 or 10% of the vote and take it away from Republicans, then I would agree. But if you look at the major states, I don't think he will be a factor this year. In fact, I think he has really discredited himself in the last several months.
He is, whatever you say of him, he is pretty good on television, as they say.
He's excellent.
He's a pretty good debater.
So are you, Bob. I mean, that's his profession.
Yes, but I wouldn't make much difference in the debates. Will Pat Buchanan make a difference if he winds up in the debates with the Republican and the Democrat?
Oh, there is no question he is extraordinarily talented on the stump, and he certainly will appeal to some people. But I believe the American people are finally seeing through Pat Buchanan.
Bob.
Well, I would say this. I mean, here it is. He hasn't even declared for the Reform Party, and he's got 9% of the vote. Imagine what happens when he starts working for it.
Mr. Robertson, we'll
yes,
let you have the
I just wanted to
last
say,
word.
if he pulled one rabbit out of the hat, if he picked a labor leader like Hoffa as a running mate, he could do serious damage, but he might hurt the Democrats as much as the Republicans in those industrial states, which are going to be key. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois will decide the Electoral College vote, and he could hurt somebody out in those states with a running mate of the labor unions.
And there we have to leave it. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about all of this in days and months to come. Joining us now, Pat Robertson in our studio, and with us from Longboat Key, Florida, Tad Devine. We're going to talk first to Pat Robertson. Reverend Robertson, you said last week, and I think you pretty much surprised and sort of shook up a lot of conservatives when you said that George Bush's election prospects were, and this is your word, iffy. Why so?
as we know, and I'm not saying anything that isn't known to the media, he's blown a major lead, and the campaign has lost focus in these last several weeks, and people keep saying, will he please get back on message? Now he's closed the gap that was the so-called convention bounce with Gore, but it's razor thin, and in some of the key states which are necessary for the Electoral College, such as Missouri and Florida, Gore seems to be edging ahead, and we're looking at Michigan as a toss-up, and maybe Illinois gone, and Pennsylvania in the balance. So we're talking about some very serious matters in these next several weeks.
Well, is he doing something wrong, or is Al Gore doing something right? What's happened here in your view?
I think Bush has gotten off message. You know, you cannot outspend Democrats if you're a Republican, and if you try to match the Republicans, the Democrats dollar for dollar on Medicare spending or drug benefits for seniors and things like that, that really doesn't electrify the people in this country, I don't believe. It's important to some, very important, but it's not something that you need to be majoring on. And I think Bush went off message when he started debating that with Gore.
Well, is Lieberman the secret weapon here? I know you said at one point that you thought he might siphon off a lot of conservative Christian votes. Is he doing that?
Well, Joe's been on my program. He's a super guy, and he's made statements in the past that have resonated in the hearts of the religious conservatives. You know, Bob, the thing people have to remember is the good portion of the religious conservatives are ex-Democrats. I'm an ex-Democrat. I used to be a member of the Democrat Party. I managed Adlai Stevenson's campaign on Staten Island, at least in the primaries. And so, you know, they have to be careful that they're not wedded necessarily to Republican politics.
Well, Mr. Robertson, George W. Bush stayed away from your convention of Christian conservatives this week. He sent a tape to the convention instead. Why do you think he did that?
It's a strategic move. I'm sophisticated enough, I've been around the track enough to understand what they're doing. They figure they've got the conservative base locked up, and they don't have to worry about it. So the play is to the independents, the swing voters, that little sliver of 10% or 15% of the electorate that they think they've got to get a big portion of in order to win the election. It's a dangerous strategy just to ignore your base, especially to play like something you're not. And that's what that convention was. It was Democrat light in Philadelphia. You know, we were sort of hiding the congressman. They wouldn't let Dick Armey and people like that get on the platform.
So are you saying that this is a stupid strategic move?
Well, no, we'll only know in November what's right. But I do know what gets people energized, because I've been out there long enough, and I was working with George Sr. in '88 when he won decisively over Dukakis, and I saw a winning strategy with Lee Atwater, and I was part of a small group that was giving advice. And the thing that I begged them to do in '92 against Clinton was to come on tough. And I think that's what George Bush has got to do now. He's got to begin hitting Gore where Gore is vulnerable. The big spending, that possibly doubling the size of government, he's got to come out swinging like a fighter. And if he doesn't do it, if he continues this sort of be nice sort of approach, I think he's going to lose.
You know, I must say, Mr. Robertson, that I'm a little stunned to hear you say what you're saying this morning. A lot of times a politician or somebody will make a statement like you just did about that it's iffy, his chances are iffy. It comes out in the paper, and then we invite them on the program, and they sort of back off that. But you're not backing off that. In fact, I think you've gone further this morning than you did when you made that statement.
Bob, I want to say clearly on the record, I want very much for George Bush to win the election. I do not wish to see a Gore presidency, because from the social point of view, I think it would be a disaster. Plus, the spending proposals that he has advanced would be devastating to the federal budget.
But are you saying right now the Christian conservatives will stay home in this election unless Bush gets out there and starts attacking Gore?
I don't know what to say. All I know is that they are not energized. We've talked to people, and the word's coming back from Texas, not just other places. They're saying, why doesn't he get in there and start really hitting Gore? They understand. You know, in South Carolina, it was iffy in South Carolina, and then they got tough, and we got tough, and he won decisively against John McCain. But he has to come through like a fighter. And we can't have these cutesy ads about rats and all that nonsense. I mean, I would have fired the guy that did those ads. They were terrible, you know. You don't make games in a presidential campaign, but you have to take major issues where the opponent is vulnerable and point them out to the people so there's a clear-cut choice. Right now, the people don't think they have a choice. They haven't delineated the positions of the candidates, at least in my opinion, as clearly as they need to be.
One question about this abortion drug that
Yeah.
the administration or the Food and Drug Administration or whoever it is that does that sort of thing
Yeah.
said could now be sold in this country. Do you think, were you stunned that all of a sudden with 3 or 4 weeks to go in this election that suddenly this became legal? Is there some coincidence here, or do you think there's any political motive here?
Franklin Roosevelt said, when something happens in Washington, you know it was planned. There are no accidents up here. I never in any way diminish the skill of Bill Clinton. He is one of the most masterful politicians that's ever walked the planet, and I think without question this is a political ploy to try to entrap Bush into a rabbit trail, if I can use that term, in these closing weeks of the campaign. And so far, Bush has avoided the trap. He made a good statement. He said, look, I'm against this thing. It'll lead to more abortions. If I were president, I wouldn't have allowed it. But our staff at CBN has done some exhaustive research about a year or so ago about the effects of this thing on women. It is very devastating. This is a health problem to women. I think the FDA rushed to judgment, and there needs to be an independent evaluation of what this can do for women. Forget the abortion issue right now, just on the danger to women of what would happen if you take this drug 40 days after pregnancy.
Pat Robertson, you always have something interesting to say when you come to visit. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.